December 25th, 1897. Snow did not fall. Not this Christmas. London was damp and sullen, the kind of cold that crawled through seams and sat in the lungs. Lights worked hard at being cheerful, but the alleys kept their shadows. In a narrow room above a barber shop near the borough, a woman named Mary Isabella Spink tried to breathe without wincing. The room smelled of hair tonic, boiled water, and something metallic that wouldn't go away no matter how wide the window was wedged. On the dresser sat a chipped cup and a brown bottle with a chemist's label, its cork stained a faint accusing green. He had said it was medicine. He had a way of saying things that sounded like answers. He was called George Chapman now. He was sometimes called husband. He was sometimes called proprietor. He had been other men before. Severin to those who remembered another country, another winter. He moved through London like a man changing coats. Different names, same shoulders beneath the wool. Mary watched the gaslight tremble. The flame breathed with the house, inhaling when carriage wheels rattled past, exhaling when the street settled. She pulled the blanket to her chin and listened to him walk up the stairs. The tread was careful, always careful. He never hurried. He timed everything. She had loved that once. It made him seem steady. In a city of ragged hours and unstable men, he seemed deliberate, gentle even. He opened the door, a narrow slice of yellow across the floorboards, and slid in sideways to keep the draft off her. He set down a small tray. Tea. Another dose. A folded cloth soaked in something pungent, bitter as the underside of a coin. Just a sip, he said, and his voice was a hand that smoothed the pillow she couldn't rest her head on. To help you sleep. He did not lie the way fools lie. He lied the way a craftsman planes a board. Smooth, steady, shaving down splinters until a surface looks clean enough to touch your face to. Mary smiled because it was Christmas, and that is what one does. Her smile was a wound. You'll stay? She asked. Not are you killing me? Not what is in the bottle. She was not a woman who asked such questions aloud. She asked them inwardly, where the answers echo longest. Of course, he said, and sat on the chair he had pulled from the kitchen. Their Christmas dinner had been thin, their coins counted. He had laughed about the goose they would roast next year. He had kissed her palm like a superstition. He had made promises like someone who believed in them. Outside the window, church bells said midnight, the way bells say everything, with iron certainty. The sound slid down the brick and ran like water along the windowsill. He waited for them to pass before lifting the cup to her mouth. To tell it plainly, the liquid was transparent. It carried no scent she could name. It could have been water. It wasn't. The first time he had given it, she had slept and woken with a tongue, like paper, and a stomach that heaved and heaved until nothing came. He had fetched a basin and said it was a passing illness. The second time, her bones had stared through her skin. The third time, something inside her body had begun to suspect the truth. But suspicion is not proof, and proof does not always save anyone. He tilted the cup. One sip. She let it rest on her lower lip, watched his eyes above the rim. Grey eyes, winter eyes, hands that smelled of pomade and lemons, and faintly of something burned. You don't know him, a voice in her said to anyone who might be listening. The city, the walls, the air. You don't know him. But maybe you do. Maybe you've stood in front of a mirror and watched someone behind you try on a smile that wasn't for you. Maybe you've heard a promise that sounded exactly like a vow until later, when you were ill, when your thoughts blurred like steam on glass. She swallowed. The house accepted the sound without comment. On the street, someone sang a carol badly. Someone laughed. Somewhere a baby coughed. And far away a train threw a ribbon of noise through the night. He wiped the edge of the cup with a clean cloth, as if the vessel could be contaminated by her lips. "You're burning," he said, feeling her forehead with the back of his fingers. He was right. Heat rose and fell through her like tides, leaving her shaking and then still. He turned down the lamp. "Tell me," she whispered. She was not sure what. A story. A promise. The truth. Anything to hold her in the world as the corners of the room seemed to soften and slide. The ceiling lowed like a storm. He obliged, as men like him always do. He said he had seen women die before, poor souls, and he spoke about it with the fatigue of a professional who has tended too many sick rooms, with that weary intimacy that invites trust. He said he knew when the crisis would peak and when it would pass. He said he would keep her safe. He said it like a litany that absolved him. Each word was a thread. Together they made a net. She lay in it and looked at the shadow where his head cast against the wall. The net held. The net tightened. She didn't see the edges of him when he was elsewhere, in the shop, resetting blades and sterilizing combs with a fastidiousness that was virtuous where everyone could watch. She didn't see the chemist's counter where he asked for supplies like a man with many responsibilities and few resources. She didn't hear the way he talked about her to others. Sweet Mary, so easily unwell. How he made her fragility part of a narrative about himself. She knew only the room, the cough, the cup, and the way her thoughts began to scatter like pins spilled on the floor. A fog moved through her. It smelled like damp stone. It tasted like pennies. When she closed her eyes, she was a girl again, running down a hill until the ground let go. When she opened them, he was watching with a concern that looked holy. Here is the part that the city will remember and pretend to forget. That on a holiday meant for abundance and love, a private theatre unfolded behind a door whose paint had been touched by hundreds of hands. That compassion can be a mask. That there are poisons which do their work so slowly, so carefully that they are mistaken for fate. He was precise with timing. That is how he lived. That is how he worked. That is how he loved. He timed her breathing. He timed the intervals between doses. He had in another life learned to measure without rulers, to weigh without scales. He had apprenticed himself to the idea that the body is a set of valves and vessels, that illness is a lever. He knew how to pull, gently, repeatedly, until a door opened. Toward dawn the walls leaned in. The city exhaled. The night emptied its pockets. He folded the cloth, replaced the cup well out of her reach, and sat with his hands folded on his knees. He could wait. He always could. Mary drifted. A memory rose. A bakery. Morning light. The bell over the door that rang like a bird every time someone entered. The smell of warm bread and rain in their hair. He had smiled then. A real smile that caught in his cheeks. He'd said, "We could run a place like this." She had believed him. Belief is a door too. She had opened it. He had stepped through. Her stomach cramped so hard it became something else. Pain rearranged the room. Everything was sharp and then distant, like seeing through glass. She made a sound that was not quite a cry. He lay a hand on her shoulder and said, "Shh." He said it the way he might to a child, or a dog, or a tool that threatened to slip. He said it like a man practicing tenderness until it fit him. The bells, again. Different church, slower rhythm, the kind that marks time like a pulse. She watched the gaslight shrink to a seed, then flare. Another sip might quiet that seed, he said. Another sip and the fever will break. You can imagine the scene, because the room is a room you have known. Small, patient, the furniture borrowed or bought second-hand, the windows too thin for the cold they are asked to keep out. You can see the bottle with its respectable label. You can hear the hush of a man who wants to be trusted. You can feel the bone certainty inside you that something is wrong, and the equal certainty that nothing, not even the wrongness, will stop the ritual from running to completion. She took the second sip. At this point, the city turned its head on the pillow of the Thames and pretended not to hear. London is good at that. It is an old city. It has learned to let private tragedies dissolve into the background hum. A constable paused outside to strike a match and light his pipe. A cat scratched under a door. In a cellar 2 houses down, someone snored like a saw. Mary slept. The sleep had edges. They cut. He lifted the basin closer just in case and kept counting the minutes in his head. He had done this before. When snow finally began to fall. Late, thin, ambivalent. It did not touch the rooftops so much as hesitate above them, as if deciding whether this city deserved softness. He stayed until the light bruised the window. Then he stood, stretched carefully to work the stiffness from his back, and adjusted the blanket with decent care. He cleaned the cup. He washed his hands. He did everything properly because propriety makes a good costume. Downstairs, the street door opened and shut. Somewhere, a neighbor would later say she heard it. Somewhere someone would remember a footstep descending with the consistency of a metronome. But for hours, the room above the barber shop held its breath around a woman whose pulse had become a whisper. Hours are easy to lose in a city that measures itself by chiming and smoke. You can say she was loved. You can say she was tenderly watched. You can say she was ill and it was sad. All those sentences are ways of not saying the other sentence, that on this day, in this place, someone made a deliberate decision to move another person from life to death with small, almost invisible gestures. A cup, a damp cloth, a hand on a shoulder, a voice like warm water running from a tap. Christmas morning arrived as all mornings do, casual, indifferent. The market women called to each other. Horses kicked steam into the air. The first customers came for shaves before dinner. The mirror downstairs showed a bright, ordinary day. Upstairs, the room dimmed as if the light were embarrassed by what it witnessed. Look closely. There is a pattern here. One woman in one room is not the whole story. The city will offer you variations of the same room, the same bottle, the same promise whispered above the same cold hands. And if you listen past the bells, you may hear what she heard last. Not angels, not carols, but the rhythm of a man's counting, quiet and exact, as reliable as the knife he uses at work. Lock your doors, put on your headphones, because after this, you will not hear the word medicine the same way again. December 26th, 1887. Morning wore a thin, pewter light, the kind that makes London seem suspended between breaths. The streets had an after-Christmas quiet, a hangover of hymn and ale. In the room above the barber shop, Mary Isabella Spink woke to a world that refused to settle into focus. The teacup was exactly where he had left it. The basin, rinsed and set to dry. The pillow damp with the salt of a night no one would speak of in full sentences. Her body had become a ledger, each ache a neat entry, each wave of nausea a total. She looked at the ceiling and tried to count the hairline cracks. When she reached the 9th, the door opened. He did not rush to her. He walked softly as if the floorboards might break into protest. He carried a small parcel of bread and a slice of ham wrapped in paper, printed with a grocer's shouting promises. He placed them on the dresser and smoothed the paper with 2 fingers, the way a man might smooth a page before reading a confession. "How do you feel?" he asked. Simple words, an invitation to lie. "Better," she said, because there was a kind of safety in that word. It closed doors before they were fully open. It made other people comfortable. It made the story manageable, a thread that could be wound around an everyday spool. He watched her mouth form the word. He pulled up the chair. He set the parcel aside, took out the brown bottle, and tilted it toward the lamp as if the light might read the label for him, might absolve him of memory. Then the cork. Then the sound like a sigh. Downstairs, the bell over the shop door jangled. A man's laugh broke the morning. Clippers rattled. Hot water steamed in the basins, and lather rose like small mountains on strangers' faces. The mirror caught the day and pretended nothing was wrong. That is a mirror's job. Reflect, never remember. He measured the dose as if he were aligning an edge. In his other life, the scissors must be sharp, the lines clean, the movement exact. He brought that discipline to the bedside, to this lie that isn't called murder. He held the cup to her lips again. She turned her head slightly, barely a flinch, as if the pain the night had given her might be multiplied by any single act. He waited. He did not force. He was patient the way fog is patient, settling in, clouding, muffling, staying. "Just a little," he said. You could tell yourself this was the moment to scream, to knock the cup away, to name the green you've seen blooming at the cork as something other than medicine. But the body makes peace with what it thinks will keep it alive. And love, even exhausted love, is persuasive. She took a mouthful and let it sit on her tongue to test it. No flavor, no sting. The aftertaste was only the memory of the night, which might as well be taste. She swallowed. There are versions of the story where neighbors appear like conscience. A woman crossing the hall pauses, hand on her shawl, listening to the sounds of a sick room she doesn't mean to hear. The basin shifting. A low voice. The barber's wife in the next building rearranges her stew pot on the hob and wonders whether she should send up broth. Then thinks of the money she owes and closes the thought like a drawer. A child plays with a wooden soldier in the yard and looks up at the upstairs window, counting to see if anyone looks back. But the truest version is quieter. No one interrupts. No one ever does at the moment it matters most. He wiped the rim of the cup again and set it down. He touched her wrist with 2 fingers and counted backward from 10, as if conjuring a calm that belonged to him, not to her. He leaned near enough for her to smell the scent he carried always. Lemon oil, soap, a trace of coal. Something else too, the unnameable that clung to him now. "I've asked a doctor to look in," he said, as if he were inviting a judge to a play he had written. "Just to be sure." She nodded. Relief is a kind of opiate. A doctor meant that this was ordinary illness being managed in an ordinary way. A doctor meant this was not a private inverted ceremony overseen by a single officiant with winter eyes. A doctor meant witness, which is the same thing as light. By noon it rained, a steady line that stitched the roofs together. The shop was busy. A sailor with a scar asked for a close shave. A bank clerk talked about the market as if it were a living, moody thing. The bell jangled. The mirror smiled its glass smile. and between customers he washed his hands very carefully, each finger a separate thought. He returned upstairs with broth. He sat within arm's reach. He did not touch the bottle while the house listened. The doctor came late, a man whose coat had seen better winters. He warmed his hands over the gas, his breath writing small ghosts in the air. His bag clicked open like a mouth. He peered, he prodded. He made the reassuring sounds of a professional who believes in the slow economies of rest. Fever, gastritis, perhaps some bad fish. The city was full of things that tried to kill a person slowly. This looked like one of them. He told Mary to drink water. He told George to keep the room ventilated. He wrote his name on a scrap and said he'd call again if needed. When the door shut behind him, the room sank back into itself. Mary watched the paper with the doctor's name on it curl at the edges from the damp. She waited for the magic to happen. That transformation, where attention changes an illness, and the body, grateful for the witness, decides to recover. It did not come. Dusk moved in early, a natural trespasser. The street lamps lit, bells chimed. The city turned its vast face toward another night. He made the bed neat around her and turned the lamp low. He changed his coat and went downstairs for an hour, 2 at most. He told the neighbour on the landing that Mary was under the weather, and he appreciated any quiet if she could manage it. He said it with a polite half smile. He was good at asking for the exact kindness that ensured everyone stayed away. While he was gone, Mary listened to the house. Houses talk if you lie still enough. The tight cough of timber, the sigh of pipes, the comfortless lullabies of other people's lives passing through walls. From a window across the yard, she heard someone play a hymn badly on a violin. She remembered a summer day in another town, another room where she'd believed things could begin cleanly. She thought of the bakery with the bell, the promise like a warm loaf cut in half and shared. She thought of how promises turned stale when left out in the air too long. The nausea came in a precision she had begun to dread. Not random, not whimsical. It rose at intervals, like a tide obeying a moon. She crawled to the basin and felt something in her middle seize and release, like a hand making a fist around her insides. The sound of her body emptying itself was small, but in that room, it was a bell rung for no one. When he returned, he was gentle enough to make a cruel man weep with admiration. He supported her shoulders. He whispered that she was brave. He used the cloth cool and clean across her forehead. He said this would pass. He said the words soon with such conviction that time itself bowed and backed away. This is where the city enters the story with a ledger of its own, though it prefers not to show it. Losses that look like accidents, misfortunes that wear the mask of chance. A woman dies of something the law cannot name without embarrassment. A man wears a black armband and receives condolences in a voice the street saves for funerals. The house forgets quickly, but the pattern sits up and stretches in the quiet like an old cat, pleased to find itself welcomed. Late now. The rain turned to sleet, a hiss against the panes. He fed the stove and warmed his hands. He refilled the cup to the quiet line he had chosen and did not cross. He looked at her the way a steward looks at a clock he keeps wound perfectly. He asked if she trusted him. She said yes. The word left her mouth and hung in the air like mist before it went where such words go. Into him, into the walls, into the dark. You might think she saw it then, the outline of what he was. But monsters in cities don't always show their teeth. They stand in doorways with good posture and remember birthdays. They attend to the soap and the towels. They play at being men so well that the room does not know the difference until the lamplight has gone thin and the breath grows shallow. Near midnight, he hummed a tune without noticing he was doing it. A Polish lullaby, softened by years and the need to pass as someone else. The melody sounded like a road home that could not be found on any map. For a moment his face loosened, the mask slipping not to reveal a snarling thing, but a distance, a vacancy that made him seem far away and therefore safe. He offered the cup again. She took it because the night was cold and the room was shrinking, and a cup in a loved hand is one of the few simple objects the darkness cannot make terrible until it is too late. She drank. She set the cup down. She did not look at the bottle. Outside, the river turned in its sleep. The city rolled over and said nothing. And in that quiet, while a single gaslight buzzed like an insect in an amber dream, Mary's body kept its awful appointments. The nausea, the cramps, the silence that widened between breaths. He sat precisely where he sat before, hands folded, a guardian at a door he had built himself. Listen closely. This is not only a story about one woman in a room. This is the second door opening in a corridor of doors. We are inside London, and London remembers, though it claims amnesia. How easily kindness and cruelty can be confused when poured from the same brown bottle. December, 28, 1897. The frost on the windows came in patterns that looked almost deliberate. Veins of white crawling from the corners inward, as though something behind the glass were trying to get out. Inside the room above the barber shop, Mary Isabella Spink was very still. The kind of stillness that does not yet mean death, but has begun to imitate it. Her lips were pale, her breathing thin. The space between each rise of her chest longer than before. George Chapman sat in the chair beside her, the same chair he had dragged from the kitchen days ago. He had not slept much, not because of guilt, but because he was waiting. He understood patience as a weapon. Time could do what a sudden act could not. It erased suspicion. It softened witnesses. It gave suffering a natural rhythm, as if the world itself were conspiring with him. Downstairs, the barber shop carried on. Men came for shaves, for gossip, for a bit of warmth against the freezing air outside. The apprentices joked quietly. The blades hissed through foam. No one thought to question the quiet upstairs. No one ever did. By now, Mary had stopped asking what was in the medicine. She had stopped asking for the doctor. The request had drained from her as her body emptied itself of everything else. Energy, appetite, hope. She watched George through half-closed eyes and tried to remember the exact day she had first loved him. The precise moment she had mistaken his intensity for devotion. There had been rain that day, she remembered. Rain and music spilling from a tavern door. He had offered her his coat and smiled with the kind of warmth that suggests safety. It was a powerful illusion. She hadn't known then that safety can also be a kind of trap. Its walls invisible until you test them and find you cannot leave. That afternoon, as the light bled pale through the frost, George prepared another dose. He did it slowly, almost ceremonially. The cork creaked, the liquid shimmered clear as truth, and for a brief moment his reflection in the glass bottle looked like a stranger. Perhaps that was what he wanted, to see himself as a caretaker, not a killer, to believe he was administering mercy. "Drink this," he said softly. "It will help." The words sounded rehearsed, like lines spoken on a stage no one else could see. Mary tried to smile, but her lips trembled instead. "I think," she whispered. "I'm worse." He leaned forward, his hand hovering near her wrist. "You'll be well soon. It's only the fever leaving you. The medicine is working." The sentence was perfect. It carried the ring of reason, the calm of logic. And yet in the dim light, his shadow looked larger than he was, and it moved a moment after he did, as if reluctant to follow. She drank. The air in the room changed. Not temperature, but pressure. As though the walls exhaled in a unison. She felt it immediately. The slow churning fire in her stomach. The sweat rising cold on her forehead. The body knows when it is being betrayed. It doesn't speak, but it pleads in its own language. Quivers, spasms, the sudden clutch of muscles trying to force something out that will not leave. He wiped her mouth with the cloth. He murmured things no one will ever remember precisely. Tender things. Empty things. "You're brave. You'll sleep now. I'll be right here." Outside, London was a cathedral of fog. The streets glistened with meltwater and horse dung. The gaslights turned halos into blurs. Somewhere near the river, bells were ringing for evening prayer, but their notes came muffled through the mist, like voices from underwater. People passed beneath their window. Dock workers, girls laughing arm in arm, an old woman selling roasted chestnuts from a cart. Life went on. That was the terrible beauty of it. How the city continued to breathe even while one of its own was quietly suffocating. By the time the first clock struck 6, Mary's fingers had begun to twitch. Her eyes fluttered open, then rolled back. A thin foam gathered at the corner of her lips. Her body arched once, twice, then fell still. George caught her shoulders gently, almost lovingly, guiding her back onto the pillow. His expression did not change. There was no triumph in it, no malice, only focus. He was timing again, always timing. He waited until her breathing steadied into shallow, uneven gasps. Then he reached for the window latch and opened it slightly. The air that rushed in was knife cold. It carried the smell of coal smoke and the Thames, a smell that might have masked anything. He let it fill the room for a moment before shutting it again. He knew about ventilation. He knew about evidence. When he was satisfied, he took the bottle, corked it, and placed it back in the cupboard beneath the sink. There were others there. Empty ones, labelled neatly, as though this were an ordinary collection of remedies rather than a private archive of the dying. He returned to the chair. He didn't touch her again. He simply watched. The human body, he knew, could take hours to cross the line from living to dead. It was like waiting for a candle to gut her out. You never quite knew which flicker would be the last. At one point, she stirred. Her voice was barely audible. "George." He leaned close. Her eyes were glassy but searching. For what? Mercy, truth, God. He could not tell. "Yes, my dear. I..." The rest of it dissolved in a breath. Her hand lifted slightly, then fell back onto the blanket. He reached out, folded her fingers together and whispered, "Sleep." Then he sat back again and closed his own eyes. Not to rest, but to listen. The rhythm of her breathing slowed, faltered, and then came one final exhale that didn't return. A sigh that emptied the room. Silence followed. True silence. The kind that hums in the bones when all other sounds retreat. He opened his eyes. It was done. He stood, moved to the mirror on the wall, and looked at himself. The man who looked back was calm, almost handsome in the lamplight. He adjusted his collar, brushed a fleck of dust from his sleeve, and allowed himself a single nod. Downstairs, laughter rose from the shop, men celebrating, voices drunk with the leftover cheer of Christmas. Someone began to sing a tavern song. The sound reached the ceiling, thin and harmless, like echoes from another world. He listened to it while he tidied the room. He folded the cloths, emptied the basin, and wiped the cup clean. He straightened the blanket over her chest, making her look merely asleep. He even tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. When he was finished, he stepped back and surveyed the scene with the satisfaction of a craftsman examining his work. It was perfect. At dawn, he would fetch the doctor again. The man would find her lifeless but peaceful. He would pronounce that the fever had taken her. Perhaps he would write the word natural causes. The city would nod, whisper condolences, and move on. As he turned out the lamp, George lingered by the door, hand on the knob. He could almost hear her voice still hanging in the air, faint as a dream's echo. But he did not look back. When the door closed, the house seemed to settle, as if relieved to have been released from its vigil. Outside, the snow began again. Slow, soundless flakes descending over rooftops, softening the hard edges of the city. It covered everything equally. The barber shop, the alley, the window above where a woman lay cooling beneath a blanket. It covered the footprints of a man walking away, his pace steady, unhurried, precise. By nightfall, the street would forget, but the walls would not, and neither would the city, because this was not the first woman to fall ill in his care, nor would it be the last. The pattern was already forming in the silence, the tenderness, the cup, the fever that lingered too long. The house knew. The walls had seen it all. And if you stood outside that night and listened closely, you might have heard it. The faint, rhythmic creak of a chair upstairs, still rocking long after he had gone. December 30th, 1887. Fog drifted off the Thames like something exhaled from the lungs of the city itself. Thick, grey, patient. It moved between the buildings and rolled under doors, softening edges, swallowing detail. From a distance, London seemed asleep, a beast content in its own decay. But inside, a narrow flat above a barber shop on the south side of Borough High Street, silence had taken on a different weight. It no longer meant peace. It meant aftermath. Mary Isabella Spink was dead. The doctor came early that morning, summoned by George Chapman himself. There was no urgency in his knock. Death, when it looks natural, does not call for haste. He stepped inside the small, clean room, removed his gloves, and bent over the still figure on the bed. He touched her wrist, pressed 2 fingers to her throat, and waited longer than necessary, a gesture of respect, or perhaps hesitation. Then he exhaled through his nose and looked at Chapman. "It was the fever," he said. "I feared it might go this way." George nodded, eyes lowered, face composed in the perfect symmetry of sorrow. "I did all I could," he murmured. "She was too weak." The doctor's gaze swept the room, the cup on the dresser, the folded linens, the open window letting in cold air. Everything in order, nothing amiss. He signed a paper, offered a few condolences, and left his hat pulled low against the fog. The door closed, and George was alone again. He did not look at the body immediately. Instead, he sat by the stove, poured himself tea, and sipped it with deliberate calm. Steam rose from the cup and blurred his reflection in the window. He waited until the sound of the doctor's boots faded down the stairs before standing. Only then did he cross the room and stand over her. Her face was pale now, but peaceful. The poison had been thorough, merciful in its disguise. To anyone else, it might look like a woman lost to illness, another casualty of a damp winter. He adjusted the blanket one last time, almost tenderly, and whispered, "You were very brave." He said it as if she could still hear him, as if the dead required reassurance. Outside, the day unfolded without ceremony. London's streets were restless again, alive with the grind of carts and the shouts of vendors. The bells of St. George's struck the hour, and the echo crept through the fog like a heartbeat. By noon, arrangements had been made. The body would be collected by evening. The landlord, uneasy but polite, offered Chapman his sympathies and mentioned that he might find it difficult to keep the upstairs room for long now. Death, even respectable death, made tenants nervous. George accepted the news without complaint. He was already thinking ahead. There was always another lodging to rent, another woman to comfort, another set of eyes to meet his and see kindness instead of calculation. That was the thing about London. It was infinite in its forgetfulness. The city ate the living and buried the truth beneath its cobblestones. And George knew exactly how to move through it unseen. He spent the next days performing grief like a ritual. He visited the local undertaker, requested a modest coffin, spoke softly about how she'd loved music and gentle colours. He attended the burial, hat in hand, gaze heavy, with what looked like devotion. He even wept once, or seemed to. No one questioned him. The neighbours said he had been good to her, that he'd tried his best, that she had been ill for weeks. Londoners love a story that ends tidily, that keeps horror in its proper box. The coroner signed off without hesitation, and so Mary Isabella Spink was lowered into the frozen ground of Manor Park Cemetery, her name etched small and perfect into stone. The world did not stop. It never does. But in the months that followed, strange echoes began to surface. Quiet, persistent, like a song hummed under the breath. A barmaid remembered that George's first wife had died much the same way, somewhere across the river. A lodger from Whitechapel recalled another woman, pale and frail, who had vanished after a long illness under his care. The pattern began to whisper. At first, no one listened. George Chapman, though few still knew that name as an alias, had already moved again, opening another barber shop under another sign. He found new company, Annie Chapman, then Maud Marsh. Each one described him the same way. Charming, intelligent, careful, a man of quiet manners and strong opinions. Each one grew sick. Each one was told it was only a passing ailment. Each one was given a clear, tasteless tonic from a brown bottle that smelled faintly of almonds and metal. The sickness came slow, the way snow covers the ground one flake at a time, and when they died, no one questioned it. Years passed. The century began to turn. The fog thinned and thickened, as London does, swallowing one decade after another. But the pattern did not die. It stretched, linking name to name, grave to grave, until, finally, the right eyes began to see the thread. It started with a clerk at a pharmacy who recognized the quantities of antimony chloride being purchased under various names. Then a constable remembered a whisper about a barber whose women always took ill. An investigation unfolded like a wound reopening, slow, cautious, inevitable. By the time police knocked on George Chapman's door in 1902, he had grown accustomed to his dual lives, the skilled tradesman and the devoted lover, the widower, and the poisoner. They searched his rooms and found bottles, powders, ledgers with names written in careful script. And when they told him Mary Isabella Spink's name, he blinked once, as if hearing it from a distance. Then he smiled. Not wide, not mad, but small and weary, like a man who had been waiting a long time to be found. He never confessed. Not directly. Men like him rarely do. But the evidence was enough. The testimony of chemists, of doctors, of neighbors who had begun to connect the ghosts that lingered behind his rented doors. He was tried under the name George Chapman, though some still called him by his birth name, Severin Klosowski. The newspapers had their feast. The Borough Barber murderer, they called him. Others whispered a darker theory, that perhaps this was the same man who had once haunted Whitechapel as Jack the Ripper. The timelines nearly matched. The cruelty did too. But the truth is less cinematic, more insidious. He didn't stalk alleys or carve symbols in flesh. His violence was quieter, slower, more intimate. He killed not in frenzy, but in devotion. The twisted devotion of a man who wanted control, disguised as care. On the morning of April 7, 1903, George Chapman was hanged at Wandsworth Prison. The chaplain prayed, the hangman worked, the city blinked and went on living. The newspapers printed his final words. A refusal, simple and cold. I am innocent. But the walls of his last cell told a different story. They had listened to the man breathe, to the small noises a murderer makes when sleep drags him backward through every face he's erased. They say he slept little in those last nights, that he stared at the ceiling and whispered in Polish, that he wept once when no one was watching. Perhaps he saw her again, Mary Isabella Spink, lying in that narrow room above the barber shop, frost painting the window, cup by the bed. Perhaps he remembered the way her eyes searched his face in those final moments, not with hatred, but with the fragile hope that he might yet choose mercy. He never did. And if you walk today down Borough High Street, you can still find the building. The barber shop is gone, replaced by a cafe with cheerful music and warm light. But some evenings, when the fog comes in from the river and the glass steams from the inside, the locals swear they smell something strange. Not coffee, not rain, but a faint metallic bitterness, sharp as regret. They say, if you listen, you can hear the echo of a chair creaking upstairs. And maybe, just maybe, if you whisper her name, Mary Isabella Spink, the air will shiver once, as though remembering, because London forgets faces, but it never forgets patterns. Lock your doors, put on your headphones, because after this story, you'll never look at a lover's gentle hand or a harmless bottle on a nightstand the same way again.